Welcome to AIGA's Fireside Chat. This is day one of the 2022 AIGA Design and Business Conference. Thank you for joining us for this fireside and for this year's conference. Before we begin our fireside chat, a few housekeeping notes. This session is being recorded and will be available for viewing post-event. We are also live streaming to our followers on LinkedIn. Please remember that all AIGA events follow our code of conduct. Please connect with us and share your thoughts. The hashtags are AIGA Design and AIGA DBCONF. Now, it is my pleasure to welcome Bennie F. Johnson, AIGA's Executive Director, and today's guest, Katrina Alcorn, General Manager of Design for IBM. Bennie.
Thank you, Amy, and welcome everyone to the first day of our 2022 AIGA Business Plus Design Conference. When we look and we think about the intersection of design and business, we know that this really outlines the future of our world as designers and design leaders. So we thought it'd be great to start off with a conversation with a design leader who exemplifies the promise and challenge of design for the future. I have been looking forward to this conversation for months, and it's with a design executive, award-winning author, UX expert, strategist, and mom. I'm pleased to welcome to our fireside today, none other than Katrina Alcorn, General Manager of Design at IBM. So Katrina, I'm going to use your words for a second to introduce you because they're wonderful when I think about this. And these are your words. As a design leader, my job is to humanize technology. And as an organization leader, my job is to humanize the workplace. These challenges are surprisingly similar, and throughout my 20+ year career in design, I've embraced them both. AIGA community and audience, I'd like to welcome Katrina Alcorn.
Thank you, Bennie. I'm so excited to kick off this exciting conference with you.
Well, it's incredible to have you here. We talked when you first took on the role a few months ago, and we were talking about the future and vision. And I said then, I was like, I'm going to invite you back in the spring to give you a chance to get used to the new role and talk a bit about the world from your perspective and your role in IBM. I think about you writing about your values then. You said, I value authenticity, trust, and humility. And these go together, laying the groundwork for innovation. So let's just jump in and talk about your role today. You're general manager of design at IBM, which is the world's largest design practice when we really think about it.
Yeah. So yeah, it's quite an opportunity we have at IBM. We have more than 3,000 designers and design executives, and they're embedded in every part of our business. So our designers are not just designing software and hardware that IBM sells, but we're designing programs and initiatives and really trying to use the superpower of design to transform our business and make our entire business more innovative. And I get to kind of be at the helm of this amazing work and this incredible talent that is moving and shaking IBM.
So I'd like to give our audience a sense of this unexpected journey, right? Where you started, and some people may be familiar and others may not know, but I always find it fascinating that you started off with words. You started off with a journalism background. So tell me a bit about how Katrina goes from words to design.
Yeah, from words to design. It's funny, I gave a talk recently to our content designers at IBM, and it was called Designing in Words, because that's kind of where I started. So my job, I'm old enough to say my job didn't exist when I was in college. The internet was not yet a thing. It was just about to become a thing, but people hadn't really heard about it yet. It wasn't mainstream. And so I wanted to be a writer. I thought the highest and best calling for me was to be a writer. I'm a big reader. I love to read. And to make a long story short, I had a short career, very exciting, but short career in journalism. I focused on documentary film, and I did it long enough to know it was thrilling work and a terrible way to make a living. especially when you live in the most expensive city in the world. I was living in the Bay Area. So I ended up taking a job at a startup because that's, I was just being opportunistic. I didn't really know. I was zigzagging my way through, which is how I've moved through my whole career. And about 6 months into working as a content strategist as a startup, I realized I wanted to be a designer. I thought like a designer. The skills that you gain as a journalist around being able to ask all kinds of crazy questions and get people to give you the real answer, being able to get underneath, what people say to really understand root causes and what's the real story, being able to take a lot of data together and bring it together into a story and then rally people around that story. Right. That's what writers do, but that's also what designers do.
Right.
So it was, considering it's a big switch, it was a surprisingly seamless transition. I also got into design at a time when people were taking any warm body. Now we have, master's programs and all kinds of training that many people go through, but we were making it up, 20 plus years ago.
It's fun when we talk about kind of making it up, but having that sense of creativity and fearlessness to kind of move things forward. So with IBM, you have a really interesting challenge. We talk about a business, and we've had a lot of conversations about startup energy and startup spaces. Mm-hmm. But at IBM, you have the challenge of an organization that's been known for generations for being a leader in this space.
Yeah.
And you're playing with this rich legacy, but you're brought in to move things forward for a dynamic future. Mm-hmm. What were some of the challenges and the learnings you've had coming into this role?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I started well because I negotiated a 2-month gap between my last job and when I actually started at IBM. And I used part of that time to move my family across country. So we relocated from California to New York for the role. But I was able to kind of get my head in the history of IBM. And it is such a rich history of innovation and design. And it wasn't, just like my career, the innovation at IBM has not been a straight line. It's been these series of, peaks and valleys where I would say the through line at IBM is always from the very beginning, the company was helping people do more with their data. They were making punch cards and, that was the revolutionary 100 years ago. And that technology helped, spur things like the Social Security Administration and the US Census. So going from there to where we are today with AI and hybrid cloud technology has been a big switch. But design has had a key role to play at each of these pivots. Each time we kind of turn the corner and try to enter a new area and really innovate. And about 10 years ago, design was in one of those valleys. It wasn't in a peak. There was very few designers. And the prior general manager of design, Phil Gilbert, did this incredible thing. He was tasked with building up design again at IBM. And so he took the company on an 8-year journey to get us to where we are right now, one of the biggest, if not the biggest design practices in the world. And now I'm stepping in. So this is the first time for me. I built 2 very successful design practices pretty much from scratch. One was sold to Facebook, another was at Autodesk and in the digital experience group. And now I come into this situation where we have a in many ways, pretty mature practice. We've got the talent and the programs and a lot of norms around ways of working, mature design system, a lot of the things that I've had to create from scratch. So my challenge has been humbling because I come in thinking I have lots of great ideas, and I do, but it turns out most of my great ideas, someone's thought of them. A bunch of people have already tried them. And so it's a different challenge. It's figuring out what's been done, what didn't work, what did work, and how do we make it better? So I probably spent a good 6 months on a listening tour all over our studios. We've got designers all over the world. And then also talking with our C-suite executives and figuring out what they need to do and what their challenges are and how design can help them. And out of that work, I tell people I was designing design. Out of that listening tour, right, I've kind of worked with my team to craft a vision for where we're going next.
So what do you think is next? I mean, it's really a humbling role to step in, because the work that had been done before was subject last year of a Harvard Business School case study.
Yeah.
So you kind of walk in like that was successful, but you have a whole new world to
Yeah.
deal with additional challenges and really kind of an incredible opportunity. So what are the things that most intrigued you or were revealing about this listening tour?
Yeah. So I, just to give a window into what this listening tour looked like, even when I was interviewing for the job, which was over a year ago, I always take notes. This goes back to my reporting background. And so with each interview where, I was being interviewed by SVPs and people on the C staff, I at some point I would get a chance to turn the tables and I would ask the questions. Right. And I started a running list even before I started the job of all the opportunity areas that I was hearing. I was kind of mining for what's working, what's not working. And one of the things, this was at the very top of my notes, because I looked at this recently. One of the very first things I wrote down was something that my predecessor said, and I've blogged about this since. Phil Gilbert, I asked him how we were doing with design. And, it's amazing. We have this amazing practice. It's so big, so much talent. We win all these awards, constantly winning awards. But how are we really doing? How's design doing with transforming the business? And he said, we have pockets of excellence. We don't yet have pervasive excellence. So think about that. This is a company, at the time we were over 300,000 employees. We've now spun off our Kyndryl business, but we're still somewhere around, I think, 250,000. It's a huge company. Right. How do you spread those pockets of excellence to make sure that everything is excellent? And when I say excellent, I'm talking about, are we designing the right thing? Are we solving the right problem? And then are we doing it right? Is the final solution elegant and beautiful and on brand and frictionless, right? So it's both sides of the equation. Right. And so there are three themes have come up in this work, and that's become the basis of the vision. And I'll just rattle them off. I won't go into too much detail, but the three areas are around insights, teams, and learning. So insights is all about our design research practice. How are we getting access to the people we are designing for, whether it's an internal customer and external customer? And by customer, I don't just mean people who buy things, I mean people who use them and people we need to make happy. So how do we get better access to those people? And then how do we make sure that we're taking the insights from what we learn and feeding it back into everything we do as a company? So that's one piece. Teams is all about how we work as cross-functional teams. There's a Harvard Business Review story from several years ago that I always cite. They found that 75% of cross-functional teams are what I call cross-dysfunctional teams. So, this is a big problem for the tech industry that we could spend a whole hour on. But how do we get our teams working better? It's not just about design. Design doesn't do anything alone. How do we activate our partners to make sure that we're all going in the same direction? And then the third piece is around learning. And one of the things that's so wonderful about working at a company as big as IBM with the scale and the impact is we can do things that small companies can't do. And I spent a lot of my career in small companies. So education, when I was running a team of 10 people at a little boutique firm, was send someone to a conference. Today at IBM, we've got our own design, we've got these amazing design leaders, and we've developed our own curriculum around enterprise design thinking and different research methods and things that we're training our own designers, things that right now we can't even send people a way to learn, like how do you design for ethical, fair, artificial intelligence experiences, right? So those are our focus areas right now, insights, teams, and learning, and there's a lot of work
on our plate. It's really interesting, on the surface, some may listen and say, okay, Bennie and Katrina are having this conversation at this epic scale that I can't even imagine. But the reality is that as we see design mature, organizations of all sizes are accelerating the design impact to be able to design at scale. Yeah. To do exactly the same things you're talking about with the business. And it's interesting here, the three focus. I had some thoughts this morning. We were thinking about this again, about design as subject matter, right? Design leading as subject matter expertise, design as collaborative partner.
Yeah.
Design in organization is designs working with other people. Design as stakeholder, where design has accountability in driving the business, and then seeing design emerge as executive sponsor. And thinking about our organization, where design is the subject matter expertise and the role that plays. Yeah. Design is the collaborative partner and the role it plays. And actually, I missed one that I was thinking about, design as influence, right? How we lead through the other parts of the organization. And then finally, that executive sponsorship and championing. And that in today's world, design in larger organizations and mid-sized organizations has the ability to really, responsibility, play all of those roles simultaneously.
Yeah. I think that's true. I love the focus of this conference. I have to tell you, I love the focus of design and business. And I'm going to say something that will make some people mad at me, but designers are my people, and I love you all.
This is your community.
So I hope this is accepted in the spirit in which I'm sharing it. But I really think we as a profession have over-indexed on craft, what designers call craft, and we've under-indexed on business. And what I see is this craft is important. That said, overly focusing on craft, I think what happens is we end up getting, whether we mean this or not, we get perceived as gatekeepers. You can't possibly understand the design profession. It's so, it's so above your head. Let us take care of that. And we end up alienating the people who should be our collaborators. And what I want to challenge us to do is to think of ourselves as problem solvers.
Right.
Designers are creative problem solvers. Designers come to the table with a mindset and a set of tools and methodologies that do not exist in development and PM and these other disciplines. We are needed to help design the solutions to some of the most complex problems we face, and they can't be solved without designers. But it means we have to kind of lay down our arms a little bit, not try to show off our expertise in fonts and rounded corners, and we need to be able to have that discussion and know when to set it aside and talk about the business discussion. And I think that's where we're really going to get that's where we're going to really have influence and be able to really do transformative things.
Right. We talk about this a lot in our firesides and in my design adjacent podcasts with a lot of the business leaders who are at that edge of that transfer of knowledge and engagement.
Yeah.
Hear that space and air. You can't really impact change by yourself. So when we think about, the proverbial kind of table, there are multiple people at the executive table from different spaces into it. And being open gives you stronger influence when you can have the conversation with your legal counterparts, with your product counterparts, with your CSR counterparts, right? Because if your common goal is for the organization or the business, then everyone has value in there. But if you're right. If things are walled off, it creates a challenge for those other perfect collaborators who are dealing with similar problems, right?
That's right. We limit our own influence, and rather than opening up and showing people, how we can be part of the team and part of solving the complex things we face. I mean, just one other point on that, one of our superpowers, one of the things that I think is so incredible about design is we're makers. We are makers. So, does innovation happen in a bunch of bullets on a PowerPoint? Usually not. Where innovation happens is in the messy work of coming up with a hypothesis, putting it on paper, getting feedback on it. And even in those early stages when we don't know what we're doing, and it takes a lot of humility, and we have to set aside our egos to share our work at that stage, because, often our tendency is we want to make things perfect. And so design gets kind of relegated to the end of something, but I think we can be more powerful if we bring design in the beginning, and design is seen as this, sort of magic sauce to help define what problems we're solving and are we addressing them the right way. And prototyping is one way that we do that.
And I think to add to your point, I think it's also for us as a profession and professionals to be self-aware when we are in the process so that we can continue to be in the process.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
You don't want to be brought in for just one product solve.
Yes.
And then you're completely forgotten about for the next. Like this is a new way of approaching it for some organizations and making sure that we're continue to be in. We talked a bit about what's happening today is that the idea, the strategic idea, the framework, all that is design is starting to now flow throughout organizations, but it's being disconnected from the designer, design leader. And what advice do you have for our design leaders who are listening today, of various different sizes of organizations, to make sure that they're able to be an active part of the strategy, the thinking, the work that goes on with design as it rolls through their organizations?
Yeah. It's funny you're asking this. I just had a discussion with I won't name the company, but a big fintech company, and they're going through some growing pains because they're trying to build up a design practice and they hired the wrong design leader. So why was this person the wrong design leader? Sometimes we learn from others' mistakes, right? This person was so focused on, so focused on kind of being the rock star designer. Right. It's kind of all the things I was talking about. It's all kind of, the example was focused on carpet samples and like making something, this new space they're building beautiful versus, and that can be important. I'm not saying it's not important, but to the expense of solving some really big challenges that the business was facing. So what's my advice? I think it starts with being a good person. I think the design leaders who I admire and respect have a ton of integrity. They listen. They set their ego aside and listen and look for what is the real problem that needs to be solved and how can I and my team contribute to that. And that energy, when people feel that energy on the other side of the aisle, it is so well received. I'll share another example from a company I won't name. I was a consultant, so I've worked with all kinds of companies. It could be anyone, but there was a growing design practice at this company, and there was a group of design executives, and they would get in a room on a regular basis and complain to each other about how no one listens to us. And I had been on the other side of some of these discussions because I'd also worked on the business side, and they weren't getting into the business problem. They weren't making common cause with their cross-functional partners, with the executives in the business. So I think it comes back to this thing of like, we've got to be in this together. Design has a superpower and a set of ways of working that can truly transform business and transform the world. I believe that. And the way we show up as leaders will determine whether we get to have that seat at the table, whether we get to have that influence.
When you look and imagine the future, what do you see? We've been through it. It's not light or flippant or anything. We've been through an epic change the last 2.5 years. As humans, as groups, as families, as cities, as businesses, organizations, every structural way you think about our human activity has been changed or re-examined. As we kind of look forward, where do you see design having a greater impact in terms of problem solving and transformation?
So I used to teach design thinking, and now at IBM, we have our own design thinking program that we're doing a lot of updating and working on.
Right.
And when I used to teach design thinking, I would fly all over the world. When I was at Autodesk, this was part of my job, teaching employees all over the world in every function, not just on the product teams, but in HR and legal. And I would talk about how design thinking, it's too bad it has the word design in it, because it's really about problem solving, right? And what design thinking methods do for us, if we want to geek out on the methods for a minute, is they essentially help us, give us frameworks to bring together the knowledge of really smart, talented people toward a common goal. And what I've found is, we're facing major challenges globally with the pandemic, with climate change, with, you name it, issues with government and how our government functions. And these problems are so complex, they will never get solved by the smartest person in the room sitting by themselves at a computer solving it. The way they're going to get solved is by having ways to bring a bunch of really smart people together with very different backgrounds, very, diversity in all the different ways, and coming up with a solution together. But so how do you do that? Well, the traditional way that you solve problems, the old school way, is to sit around a table and the loudest voice dominates, and you banter, step back and forth, and eventually one idea surfaces. It turns out that's usually not the best way to solve problems. Design thinking gives us other methods. So it's very simple and basic in some ways, but when you really start to use these methods, and I'm probably preaching to the choir, you realize there's so much art and science that goes into doing that part right.
But I think, even with that, I think it's powerful for us to remind ourselves that here is the superpower in action. Here's the training. When we did our design PLV research last year, and we talked about what it means to be a designer, the data clustered around these three areas. It was an experience set, like experience and skills you have. And it was a mindset, which was kind of an approach to it. And the last part was an impact set. Kind of looking at how you can have impact in the world and kind of reinforcing each of those ways we go through. So continuous learning, continuous exploration, right? And going through those processes, but also being kind of committed to the way that you approach the world as a way to drive impact. We saw that as important in our space. So, we started off talking about your power of words. And I know that, you naturally have gone to words in your life when you're thinking of hard topics or thinking of transition in there. So I want to share with our group a little bit, because I'd be remiss if we didn't talk about it. You are also an award-winning author who has spoken at every platform you can imagine, and your works have been featured in everything from New York Times and Fast Company. I want to talk a bit about Maxed Out, American Moms on the Brink. And here's a quote from Publishers Weekly. "This book is a brave admission." Another quote, "A brave, often funny, unbelievably timely conversation, sparking the tale about motherhood and work." So I love when we talk about it. You light up when we talk about your writing and the notion of motherhood at work. Talk a bit about that process that you went through.
Yeah.
That's expressed in the book, but a part of your professional journey.
Yeah. Well, it's funny because we started this conversation with how I gave up on journalism and became a designer, but the truth is I'm still a writer.
You're still a writer.
That's right. And the way
I've got proof.
That's right. And the way I make sense of the world is with writing. So to, I assume a lot of people have not heard of the book. Just to give you kind of the summary is, so I have 3 kids. When my youngest kid was born and I went back to work, I completely burned out. I had the experience that I've since learned is extremely common with working parents, especially mothers. We tend to be on the front lines, but this happens to dads too. So I had to stop working. It became a real health issue for me to burn out. And we could spend a whole hour on that. But I stopped working for a year, and I just felt like I didn't understand what happened. Until that point in my life, I felt like I could kind of push through anything. If there was a problem, I just tried harder, and it always worked. And this time trying harder did not work. It was actually part of the problem. So I started talking to other women, started realizing I was kind of onto something, that this was a real cultural phenomenon that people weren't talking about in the way I thought we needed to talk about it. And so I ended up writing a book about it. And then I went back to work, and a couple of years later, I ended up selling the book to Seal Press, which is now part of Hachette, so part of a big publisher. And so through the process of writing the book and then publishing the book and then promoting the book, and this happened over several years, it's really kind of changed who I am and how I lead at work. Now, and I should say, when I found out I was selling the book, so keep in mind, I wrote the book called Maxed Out. I'm the poster child for burnout at work.
Right.
I thought, well, okay, my career in tech is over. I wanted to be a writer, and I guess I had to make a choice, and now no one will ever hire me again. And it turned out that wasn't the truth, because
Right.
of course, what I've found since is this experience is so commonplace. And I think the book, if anything, has been a door opener, because it's broken a taboo for
Right.
people. People don't want to admit that this has happened to them, but when someone else does, it kind of opens the gates to a much deeper conversation than we normally have at work. So fast forward a decade, it's now a big part of how I lead. I used to kind of try to keep my persona separate, my book persona and my work persona, but they're completely fused now. I can't get away from, enough people have read the book. I can't hide from it. And the fact is, I think it gives it, I feel a responsibility now that I'm, in a position, I'm a senior executive at a giant company. I feel a responsibility to be very vocal about these issues, because when I can talk about my experience, it gives other people the opportunity to talk about theirs.
It is so true. And one of the reasons why I so wanted to have you for this conversation, to talk about just that power in your role, and looking through and having that moment thinking that your career is over, but looking from our vantage point now that you run the world's largest design practice and the opportunity to shape there. So I love thinking about the future in really dynamic and proactive ways. So one of my barometers of the future is to ask this little question. Do your kids have any idea what you do? just a question that we all, those who've been parents and kids and have kids, have all gone to space. My parents, looking back, never understood what I did. Space But I asked that question, when we think about design's future and long-term impact. Something that your kids actually understand.
Yeah, I don't think they do, to the extent that, you're asking. It's funny. I think about my own parents. So my dad, growing up, when people would ask what my dad did, I said he was a computer programmer, and I didn't know what that meant. Now, what's interesting is he was working on IBM mainframes. So now I'm sort of second generation, because I'm here at IBM. But do my kids understand what I do? They probably understand a little bit better than I understood what my dad did. One of the things that's been interesting about the pandemic is, your work life and your personal life are blending in new ways, in ways that they didn't before. And there have been times where I've got my office door open. This is the kitchen right over here. And what I've found is my daughter will listen in on some of my calls, and she's learning from that. It actually makes me feel so wonderful, because she's talked to me about it later and said, the way you brought that up with that person, you didn't get mad, but I could tell they were being a jerk. She's kind of picking up. She might not understand the content of what's being discussed, but she's picking up on the personal dynamics and the sort of what it means to show up as a professional. And I think that's got to be good for our kids, right?
It's so true. And for those who've worked at home, I have the same experience. My kids are teenagers, and they can hear dad's conversations and my firesides that we're having like this.
Right.
When it's the summer, they were at home, they were listening at the top of the stairs for these conversations. But we always have fun when we talk, and I realize all the ways our lives interconnect. So I don't think we ever talked about this. My dad was a software engineer as well, and mathematician at the time when that wasn't a thing that was known. And he worked in software and math in the government. So it was even more clouded in mystery.
Oh, wow. Do you know now what he did?
I have no clue. I know it would be, I can imagine if it were today's world, what he probably worked on was the equivalent of AI and NSA stuff and distributed ledger, and what those cutting edge technologies would be today. That's what he did all those years ago.
Wow.
I can assume that's what it was. And maybe it wasn't, but that's based on background, time, and experience. That's probably what he did. But I love to kind of think about our kids in that space, because they're learning that what you do is not just the design part, but they're learning about leadership. How you show up authentically, how you work with people, how you deal with challenging topics and difficult situations.
Yeah, which is a big part of the job. I mean, as you know, at every level of our careers, there will be challenging situations. There will be challenging personalities that you struggle to work with. And, it does not get easier as you move up. So it's its own skill set. What I keep coming back to, we talked about humanizing the workplace.
Right.
What I keep coming back to is there's so much. We get inundated with career advice and what's your personal brand and all this stuff. And I feel like sometimes we overcomplicate it. Be a good person. Let's start there. When I bring my humanity to work the right way, I'm better at my job. And that's true of everyone I work with. So, I like, we can read a bunch of business books about it, but I also think there's some basic stuff that we need to sort of go back to.
And what's really powerful for that, it amplifies.
Yes.
So when you're excited and better about your job, you make those to the left, to the right, below and above you better with their jobs as well.
That's right. That's right. And by the way, when I say be a good person, that doesn't mean be a people pleaser. I make controversial decisions all the time, and people get mad at me. But what I strive for is to be as transparent as possible and to give people the respect to hear their viewpoint before I come with a decision. So there's this way that someone gave me this feedback a while back from my team about being tough but fair, or tough but kind. And it's that balance. We're constantly trying to kind of find that in between space. If we have high standards and we need to uphold those standards, but we do in a way that's humanizing and hopefully galvanizes people and makes them excited to come to work. I don't want anyone to be afraid to come to work. I want people to want to come to work. I want work to help us be better people, not the other way around.
What I love if you're talking about it is it's an active position. Not I have one set of spaces and that's just what it is, and I set it and forget it. It's all of this kind of navigation and pulling.
It's dynamic. It's very dynamic.
Which thinks about it. And those are the nuances that our kids pick up when they hear us doing what we do, right?
Yeah.
That we get the space in there. So, but still pushing forward to the future, our kids in space in there. As you look down, what are the things that give you the most hope? We're in a space in which we're never at a loss for needing more hope these days. So what are the things that you think about in design and the future that gives you hope?
Yeah. The last few years have been so tough, I think, for all of us. And, the problems we face just seem to get more and more complicated. The problems around human rights. I mean, this stuff with the Supreme Court right now and women's rights, all the stuff that's happening in our political system. We've got the midterms coming up in the US. There's just so much. And I really have my days where I just have to turn off news. And I was a journalist. So, I feel bad about doing that, but it's self-care sometimes. So what gives me hope? It's funny. I've never thought of myself as a tech geek, but for every story that I read about, broken politics, bad decision-making, new pandemic variants, whatever it is, there's a story about how someone is innovating with technology on this incredible solution. And my husband and I talk, he's also a designer, and we talk about this sometimes as the race between good and evil, for all the difficult things that have happened in our lifetimes, and especially over the last few years, there's all these amazing positive things that are happening. So I think no matter what, we need to put our kind of set our sights on the positive things and figure out how we can contribute to that, because, being paralyzed with apathy does not help the world.
It doesn't. And in true design sense, it's not our apathy, but it's our empathy.
Yeah. It's empathy, but I think we need to go beyond empathy. Actually, I'm glad you brought that up, because we talk so much about empathy.
Right.
And I see sometimes what I think of as performative empathy, where there's a lot of like Facebook posts about it, and I feel for everyone's pain, but what are we doing about it? Where are you going to donate your money? Where are you going to volunteer? Where are you going to work? How are we all playing out our values in actionable ways that affect our lives? I think we have to make sure we're doing that. And
Where
it'll
we're
look different for everyone.
Right. Where are we going to build solutions?
Yeah.
Where are we going to challenge conversations? Where are we going to
Yes.
actually put spaces in? Early on in the pandemic, I had just started in this role. And the first thing I did, similar to you, is we did a broader listening conversation. What's needed, what's going on. And part of that drove our research and insights development. And one of the first bits of information that came out was we saw that over 50% of designers were hurt adversely by the pandemic early on, in terms of the work, in terms of, livelihood, just every way you can imagine, negative impact.
Yeah.
But it was in that moment that the data also showed that more than 40% of designers were using their skills, their resources, their know-how, as we sometimes say in there, our superpowers for good in the community.
Yeah.
And it was that dynamic. You didn't necessarily see that in every community, but it was really reinforcing. And it talked about, design's ability. For AIGA, our mission is all about the core practice, design, the strategy, but then positive impact. And we saw positive impact showing up there.
I love it. Love it.
So now you are hanging out in New York. You've moved across country. You've come to New York at a time in which it's opening back up. What are you most looking forward to doing?
Oh, let me tell you,
the spring and summer.
It's already started. So, I say we moved to New York, but I just, full disclosure, we didn't move to glamorous New York. We moved to the Westchester suburbs. So I live 5 minutes from the from the IBM headquarters. We live an hour train ride from Manhattan. So one of the things I'm looking forward to is going to Manhattan, and we just went to the Met last week, and we're planning a trip. I'm actually taking a drawing class, and I've become friends with a teacher. And so we're going to do a trip with our families to the Whitney. I joined a book club, having my book club over for dinner and not having to wear masks, just like I went to a dance class last weekend. Oh my gosh, it was restorative. It was African dance, and I have done a bunch of dance classes in my life. And in the pandemic, of course, we weren't doing any of that. So all these ways that, I don't know, it feels like life is just opening up. And here in New York, it's springtime. Right. So all the trees are, have buds and the flowers are coming out. And it just feels like the whole world is starting to open in the best way. And I just hope we can keep going in this direction.
Well, I wanted to ask that question because we start off and we think about the roles that we have, right? The jobs and the titles that we have. And it can seem overwhelming that there's still a space to make space for you and make space for taking in the world around us, because that makes us better leaders. It makes us better designers, as we said. But I also wanted to make sure our audience knew that we could have a bit of fun. So you could have the biggest job at IBM and you still have time to take African dance class.
That's right. And I would add, as part of my whole thing of, being a great leader is being a good person. Part of being a good person is enjoying your life. And, it cannot all be work. Even if you love your work, there's got to be other ways that we get out of that headspace and we do other things.
Well, I'm going to give you the last word. If you could offer any advice for our conference today, we're looking at design and business. So we can offer any advice to any design business leader.
Yeah.
Looking at the next phase of work, the next phase of their career. What advice would you have for them today?
Yeah. A couple of things are coming to mind. So the first one is, this may be really obvious to some folks, but hopefully it's helpful to someone. We in design, we don't get anything done alone, right? Developers, they can get stuff done alone. They might build something that doesn't work that well, or look good, but they can do it without us. We can't do it without them. So, all the skills we have around understanding our end user, our customer, we need to apply to how we work with our cross-functional partners, like really getting in there and understanding what keeps them up at night, the heads of the different business units we work with, and helping build a bridge with how design can help them achieve those goals is really what the job is in a lot of ways. The other thing I would say, and I'm looking for the non-obvious things, is there's been a recent backlash against design thinking. And I'm rolling my eyes because everything old is new again. We go through these cycles. So design thinking was the coolest thing on earth. And now we're swinging the other direction and people are saying design thinking is dead. And what I would say is keep your eye on the ball. There are some tried and true things that we know as design leaders that we need to keep as a constant. And we can't just blow with the wind on, what's fashionable this week or what we call it. What I've seen in all the businesses that I've worked with, and it's been a lot, is it is so grounding to have a leader focused on the humans we're designing for and what those people need, whether it's the internal in the company or external. And that never gets old. It never gets stale. It never jumps the shark. And then the other piece of that is one way that I've seen design win hearts and minds very quickly. It's very efficient, is really applying our workshopping facilitation skills. Now, a lot of design leaders will reject that and they'll say, we're not your facilitator for hire. And I agree. However, when you facilitate a big executive meeting, you set the agenda and you design the outcomes. So you're transforming business in one very expensive meeting very quickly. And when people see that there's a different way of approaching problem solving, they get hooked. I've seen it over and over again. They get hooked. So, in some ways, I think a really good workshop, when it's done well, is like the gateway drug to design. People don't necessarily understand what happened. They just know something magic happened and it worked better than what they've done before.
And they saw you as a part of it.
And yes, and then they want more of that. They invest.
That's you're associated with that impact that we have there. I think that's a wonderful way for us to end our conversation today. And we can talk forever, but it's been wonderful having you here. Katrina Alcorn, design executive, wonderful writer, mom example, executive leader, humanist leader, strategist, and expert in bringing us forward. Katrina, thank you for joining us. What a wonderful way to kick off this year's Design and Business Conference. I'm excited to see what the future continues to unfold for you and IBM. And we're excited to have you a part of AIGA. To all those joining us today, enjoy the conference today, and we'll be back tomorrow for another Fireside. Thank you, Katrina.
Well, thank you. And I hope everyone has a great conference.